In the next few minutes, I'll show you the single most important invention in modern cryptography. The one that took the problem we ended episode 1 on. The problem of strangers agreeing on a shared key over a wire an attacker is reading, and turned it from impossible to routine. I'll show you what it means to have 2 keys instead of 1. The mathematical idea called a trapdoor function that makes it work. How RSA actually does it with concrete numbers. Why this is too slow to use directly and what we use instead. And the 2 pieces still missing that set up everything we'll cover next. Welcome to Defense Stack. We produce 1 concept a day and each one stacks on the last, building the framework for security together. Let's dive into asymmetric encryption. Last episode we ended on a problem. Alice wants to send Bob a message. Eve sees the wire. We covered symmetric encryption, where Alice and Bob share a secret key, and the math gives us provable security as long as that key stays secret. The catch was, we never said how Alice and Bob agree on the key. If they have to whisper it in person before the conversation starts, we don't really have internet security. We have couriered diplomatic pouches. The whole modern internet only works because, in 1976, 2 researchers named Whitfield Diffie and Diffie-Hellman published a paper with 1 mathematical idea that solved this. The next year, RSA implemented it. Everything we're about to discuss is built on that idea. Here's the move. Instead of 1 secret key shared between Alice and Bob, Bob has 2 keys, a public key and a private key. They are mathematically linked. Anyone, including Alice, including Eve, can have Bob's public key. The public key is broadcast openly. The private key, Bob keeps to himself and tells no one. The asymmetry is in what each key does. The public key can encrypt, but it cannot decrypt. The private key can decrypt. So Alice takes her message, encrypts it with Bob's public key, and ships it. Eve sees the ciphertext. Eve also has Bob's public key, but Bob's public key cannot decrypt. Only the private key can, and the private key never left Bob's machine. That's the entire trick. For this to work, you need a mathematical operation that's easy to do in one direction and computationally infeasible to reverse. We call this a trapdoor function. Here's the simplest example. Take 2 large prime numbers, each maybe 600 digits long. Multiplying them together is something a laptop does in a millisecond. The answer is a 1200-digit number we call n. Now hand someone just n and ask them to find the original 2 primes. With 1200-digit numbers, every computer on Earth working in parallel cannot do this in the lifetime of the universe. Multiplication is easy, factoring is hard. That gap between forward and reverse is the trapdoor. Whoever knows the original primes has a shortcut. Whoever only sees n does not. RSA is built directly on this asymmetry. Here's RSA in slightly more concrete terms. To generate a key pair, Bob picks 2 large primes p and q. He multiplies them to get n. Then he picks a small public exponent, almost always 65,537. From p, q, and that exponent, he computes a private exponent d using modular arithmetic. The public key is the pair n and the public exponent. The private key is d. Bob publishes the public key. To encrypt, Alice raises her message to the public exponent, mod n. The result is the ciphertext. To decrypt, Bob raises the ciphertext to d, mod n. The result is the original message. The reason it works and the reason an attacker can't compute d from the public key is the factoring trapdoor we just talked about. RSA has been holding up since 1977. There's a different path to the same destination. Diffie-Hellman key exchange doesn't encrypt anything, but it lets 2 strangers agree on a shared symmetric key over a wire that an attacker is reading. It works like this. Alice and Bob publicly agree on 2 numbers. Call them G and P, where P is a huge prime. Alice picks a secret random number, raises G to that power mod P, and sends the result to Bob. Bob does the same thing with a different secret. Now each of them takes the value they received, raises it to their own secret power, and they both end up at the exact same number. Eve saw both intermediate values fly across the wire, and she still cannot compute the final shared secret. This is the discrete log problem, and it's the second great trapdoor used in cryptography. Once you have public and private keys with these properties, you get a lot of new abilities essentially for free. Anyone in the world can send you a message that only you can read, without ever talking to you in advance. Anyone can verify that a piece of software was published by a specific entity because that entity signed it with a key that nobody else has. Two strangers can establish a private channel over a public network. A web browser can talk to a website it's never seen before in a way that is private and authenticated without either of them having pre-shared anything. Every one of those capabilities, every one, is built on the same mathematical asymmetry of the two-key system. There's one big practical catch. Asymmetric encryption is painfully slow. RSA is roughly 1,000 times slower than AES per byte. Sending a 1 megabyte file over RSA is a nightmare. Sending a 100 megabyte file is impossible. The fix is hybrid encryption, and it's what every secure protocol you actually use does. Alice generates a fresh random symmetric key, a one-time AES key. She encrypts the actual message with AES, which is fast. Then she encrypts only the small AES key, maybe 32 bytes, with Bob's public key. She sends both to Bob. Bob decrypts the AES key with his private key, then uses that to decrypt the message. RSA only had to encrypt a tiny key. AES did the heavy lifting on the actual data. This is what TLS does on every secure connection your browser opens. You touch asymmetric crypto thousands of times a day without seeing it. Every time your browser connects to an HTTPS website, the very first thing that happens is a public key handshake to agree on a session AES key. Every time you connect to a server over SSH, public key authentication is what lets you log in without a password. Every software update your phone or laptop installs is signed with a private key that only the vendor has, and verified against the matching public key your operating system was shipped with. Every cryptocurrency transaction is just a public-private key signature. The entire modern internet runs on this idea, even though almost nobody using it ever thinks about why. Step back. Asymmetric crypto solves the encryption problem between strangers, but it leaves two open questions. First, when you receive a public key claiming to be Bob's, how do you know it really is Bob's and not Eve's? Anyone can publish a public key with anyone's name on it. Second, when you receive a message and decrypt it, how do you know it wasn't tampered with along the way, or even fabricated entirely? Decryption gives you something readable, but readable doesn't mean authentic. Tomorrow we attack the second problem with one of the simplest and most useful primitives in computer science. That's the end of this concept, but each video stacks on the last. Subscribe, and we add the next layer tomorrow. So that's asymmetric encryption. 2 keys per person, mathematical trapdoors, RSA and Diffie-Hellman as the 2 foundational algorithms, hybrid encryption to keep things fast, and a quiet revolution underneath every secure connection in the modern internet. We've now closed the loop on private communication between strangers, but we still cannot prove who said what, or that what we received is what was sent. The tool we need for both is a one-way function called a hash. Tomorrow, hashing. Fingerprints for arbitrary data, the building block under signatures, passwords, version control, and every blockchain ever made. Thanks for watching.